Hello and welcome to the program. I am Imonia Marere. With just about 15 months to the 2023 general elections in Nigeria, most Nigerians are upbeat about an electoral law that would make for a free, fair, and credible exercise. The Senate, at its sitting on Tuesday, October 12, reversed itself on the issue of electronic transfer of election results after so much pressure from Nigerians. At that same sitting, the senators also adopted another amendment to Section 87 of the Electoral Act, Repeal and Reenactment Bill 2021, making it mandatory for political parties to conduct direct primaries for the nomination or selection of aspirants for various elective positions in the country. The amendment reads, and I quote, "A political party seeking to nominate candidates for elections under this bill shall hold direct primaries for aspirants to all elective positions, which shall be monitored by the Commission." The amendment replaces the current Section 87, subsection 2, which states that the procedure for the nomination of candidates by political parties shall be by direct or indirect primaries. The Senate's position tallies with that adopted earlier by the House of Representatives. Now, direct primaries involves the participation of all party members in the selection of party candidates for elections, as opposed to the indirect model, which involves the use of delegates, who are usually members of party executives at ward, local government, state, and national levels, elected legislators at state and federal levels, and appointed or appointees of governors and the president at the state and national levels. The indirect system has always been criticized as too restrictive, too skewed, and subject to abuses and manipulations, especially by the appointing authorities. And it has been at the center of several disputes and crises within political parties. The direct primary option, which was adopted in the short-lived Third Republic as option A4, on the other hand, tends to offer a more open and active participation of registered members of political parties in the selection process. But of course, some political parties appear not to be comfortable with the direct primaries option. They are concerned with the cost of the process for the parties and the aspirants who have to campaign in their various constituencies as if in an inter-party contest. They also say that it would open the floodgates for mostly money bags to run such primaries to the disadvantage of less financially endowed but credible aspirants. It will also mean that the political parties must, and we emphasize, must have updated and authentic registers of members at every level who will be eligible to vote at the primaries. Now, what is this development likely to do for the deepening of democracy in Nigeria? What impact will it have on party organization and discipline? Will it also mean more work for the Electoral Commission, that is, the Independent National Electoral Commission, that must deploy its personnel to monitor the conduct of the primaries of the political parties? Well, these are issues that we will be looking at on the program today, so we urge you to join us as we do some bit of analysis right after now. All right, thank you for staying with us. We're joined in the studio at this point in time by Dr. Emeka Nwosu. Dr. Nwosu is a public policy analyst and former media advisor to the Senate president between 1999 and 2000. Dr. Emeka was also the president, at the time president of the National Association of Political Correspondents, otherwise known as NAPOC. He is a very seasoned journalist. Dr. Emeka, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, and welcome viewers.
All right, so we will also be joined via Zoom, virtually, by Professor Yaya Tanko Baba. Professor Tanko Baba is a professor of political institutions and comparative politics at the Department of Political Science, Usmanu Danfodio University in Sokoto. I was also the former National Secretary of the Nigerian Political Science Association, NPSA, and currently Secretary of the Northwest Zone of the NPSA. Professor Yaya Tanko Baba, political science, professor of political science, joining us from Sokoto virtually. Thank you, Prof, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you. Welcome. All right, so let me begin from here in the studio. Dr. Emeka Nwosu. Did this turnaround by the Senate come to you as a surprise?
Well, thank you, Mark. What I saw that played out is a kind of reaction to public opinion, because you will recall when the Senate took that decision, to go back on the issue of electronic transmission of results. It did not sit down well with Nigerians. And there were a lot of protests from all over all the parts of the country, particularly from the civil society. Even media people, those who have columns, those who have spaces in their various newspapers, those in the electronic media, everybody ventilated their opinion. I thought that the position of the Senate was taking the country back. Because in this era, when we're talking about transparency, we want to get our electoral system right. If you remember, the Waste Committee that was set up during the Jonathan Committee, all those efforts that were made were towards reforming our electoral process to make it more credible. And the House of Reps took a position that was in conformity with expectations of Nigerians, that look, we do this election and do electronic transmission. And that would have removed so many of the issues that have given our electoral process a lot of bad names. Because you find out when elections take place at the polling unit, it is in the course of taking the result to the collation center that where a lot of problems do happen. But if we had adopted, or by the time this decision was being taken to adopt the electronic transfer, it would have eliminated all these man-made problems, so that this result will be transmitted to the collation center. And of course, the result would have been declared. All the representatives of the various political parties participating in the election would have known the result there at the polling booth. Do you understand? In fact, by the time the election is all over across the country, you'll be able to even tabulate. And we saw that happen during the June 12th election, because elections were announced at the polling booths. And if you remember that time, we had the 090 telephone. I remember that time those were in the team, the electoral team of MK Abiola, they were all armed, with those devices. So by the end of the day, people already knew. They were only waiting for INEC, then NEC, to collect their result. But they already knew that this was the outcome of the election. And if you remember, that election, the result of that election was affirmed as the most freest, the most credible in the history of the country. And there were no litigation at all concerning the outcome of that election, until the annulment. So I believe the position the Senate has taken is commendable, because what it means is that they have responded to public opinion. And I think, which is very, very important for us to note, it appears that they are listening, unlike the position they took If you remember, people were towing party lines. But I think they have gone home now to realize that, look, you cannot take a decision without consulting with your constituents or even consulting with the broader section of the society, at least to feed the pulse of the people. You cannot just sit in the comfort of the Senate chamber and take a position. So what they have done now is highly commendable, and I believe we're going to see some level of improvement in our electoral process.
Well, Prof, let me turn to you. The process of electoral reforms in Nigeria has come quite a long way. For you as a political scientist, what does this mean? With just about 15 months or thereabout to the next general election. Now, if you recall, in 2019, the proposed amendments to the electoral bill at that time did not see the light of day because it was said to have been too close to that election. But here we are with just 15 months or thereabout to the next election. We are still talking about electoral reform process, something that some people think we ought to have put behind us long before now.
Yeah, I think one thing we need to note is that reforms are usually an integral part of democratic process. I mean, you cannot imagine a democracy to grow, to mature, and to be sustained without reforms, because we are in a dynamic society, we are in a dynamic economy, and then of course, technology, knowledge, people, orientation, culture change over time. And that, of course, practices and convention also do change. And not even in Nigeria, even in advanced democracies of the world, situations arise that necessitate the need for reforms. But the problem with our reform, our path to reform in Nigeria has always been that we are not timely in initiative for reforms. Most often than not, when it comes to electoral reforms, we begin to talk about reforms only when elections are by the corner. And of course, the pressure will be mounting, and of course, different actors that have stakes in election will be competing between and among themselves to get one reform or another, introduced into the electoral system or the electoral process for it to benefit this group or not to benefit the other group. Those who holds power and those who are in the opposition will be competing between themselves to see to the possibility of introducing one form of reform or to see to the possibility of blocking one form of reform. But then, electoral system, just like other systems, it needed to be updated, needed to be renewed, needed to be improved upon. So there is no problem about reforms introduced. But are these reforms timely? And what also are the value? What is the general value, the overall value of introducing reform? What will be the impact of this reform? For instance, now we are talking about electronic transmission of results. And what we are saying is that we need an act of the parliament, of the legislature, to empower INEC to transmit results electronically. In my own view, this is about excessive regulation. I mean, multiple laws, that are not necessarily needed. The law establishing INEC have given it the power to organize and conduct elections, to introduce regulations that are, in the opinion of the electoral empire, best suited to have electoral system or electoral process that is credible, that is acceptable, that also live the test of time, and that will be regarded with high sense of integrity. So it actually beholds on INEC to determine which process, which procedure, which systems or subsystems can help strengthen Nigeria's electoral process. For instance, in the 2011 general elections, or in the build-up to the 2011 general elections, Professor Jega was appointed as the INEC chair, and he didn't need the law to introduce electronic registration. He introduced a lot of reforms. For instance, this card reader we are using and all electronic equipment that have been introduced into Nigeria's electoral system were introduced by the umpire in an understanding that such introduction will help strengthen Nigeria's electoral process. And it actually did, because it has now addressed the problem of multiple registration. And then, of course, it also addressed this, the challenge of multiple voting. And then, of course, using card reader, it's now established that one man, one vote. You cannot vote here and vote another place. You cannot vote if you do not exist in the voter registration data bank. So these are reforms that have actually improved the integrity of Nigeria's electoral process. Now, talking about transmission of results electronically, I think my opinion here is that we are in the world of technology, and the technology has come to stay, and that the whole society, the whole global society and global economy is knowledge-driven and is technology-driven. So, but the question here is that, do we have the capacity? Do we have the basic infrastructure to take advantage, to leverage on this technology? Now, if we do not have the infrastructure, and we do not have the capacity, that is where the problem lies. Nobody will stand in this age to argue that electronic transmission of results or the use of electronic means to conduct election is not proper. I don't think anybody will argue that the use of electronic means of conducting not only elections, but virtually all our affairs is not, it's bad. But then, are we ready? Do we have the capacity? Do we have the infrastructure? And then remember also, even in the advanced societies of the world in which they are driven by knowledge, IT knowledge, in the US, we have known what has happened in the just concluded American presidential elections. Doubts exist as to the authenticity of the results that actually emanate from the conduct of the election using this electronic platform that had been in use for a very long period of time. No entity today in the world can boast of safety and security of its cyber environment. Cyber security is one major area that the world is still grappling and struggling to strengthen. So now, a country and an economy like Nigeria that is leapfrogging in terms of IT, now is venturing into IT complete migration or transition from manual to electronic means of conducting elections. Then we talk about the infrastructure. Do we have the basic infrastructure all across the country in which the people who are the target of elections can actually have access to those infrastructure and vote electronically that will actually lead to the collation of results and the transmission of results? Not even that. Is the empire well prepared to?
All right, Professor Baba, please stay with us. Let's get back to the studio here, Dr. Onwosu. Let's shift a little bit now to the conduct of political parties in Nigeria. I mean, you have been an observer, a participant observer at one stage in this whole process, and some have argued that the organization of political parties in Nigeria over time has perhaps been some of the most chaotic in a way. And that at a stage during the short-lived Third Republic, we appear to have seen some measure of sanity when the option A4 was introduced in the conduct of party primaries. Before again, in the Fourth Republic, we reverted to these, whether or not a party can choose which which model it wants to adopt, which system, direct or indirect. And in the immediate past, we have seen situations where there have been crises, disagreements, and a lot of confusion in parties as to what mode of primaries should be adopted. But this amendment to the Electoral Act, Section 87, is actually now specifying very clearly that you have no alternative. There's only one mandatory means of conducting party primaries, and that is by direct primaries.
Well, thank you, Mark. Direct and indirect primaries, these are models, procedures that are available to political organizations or political parties, to nominate candidates for elective positions, even on the platform of the party or in the inter-party elections. They all come with advantages and disadvantages. If you ask me, I would have thought that the responsibility or the power, to adopt any of the models should have resided, with the political parties. Because we're talking about, building our political process. Do you understand? Building the political parties to the point that they will become independent. Do you understand? Away from what we saw during the ill-fated Third Republic, where the government had to set up two political parties, which to us were totally inorganic, both in composition and in functioning. Do you understand? So, but we would have thought, going forward, political parties, at least we're talking about internal democracy, they should have been, vested with that responsibility, to choose whichever model that appeals to them. However, the position taken by the National Assembly, because the position taken by the Senate now, it's like making it a fait accompli that each of the political parties do not have any other choice, no escape. You must
that position was also adopted earlier on by the House of
Representatives. Okay, so what it means now is that all the political parties, their hands are now tied. You must have to go the direct primaries. And what is direct primaries? Direct primaries is the involvement of the entirety of the membership of the political parties, from the ward level, of course, to the national level. Even everybody functions at the ward level. So it means for anybody presenting himself for election, you must have to seek, the support of all the members of the parties. So every registered member of the party is a stakeholder, will now have an opportunity to cast a vote for the candidate of his choice. So the good aspect of it is that it will now bring out the candidates. So it's no longer an elitist affair where you go and deal with some selected delegates who are confined in a particular room, like we saw when we covered the SDP primaries in 1993 in Jos. I remember the late Yaradua had his delegates camped in Kaduna. Aton Zeribe had his delegates camped in Bauchi. And all of them were just, prevented, from reaching out, to other contestants, other delegates, other aspirants who were at that time contesting for the position of the ticket of the party. Yes. So, but this one now opens up the party. Everybody can participate. But the problem now is that it can work both ways. For those who have the resources, those who call the money bags, of course, they can have the logistics to reach as many of these delegates as possible, wherever they are located. But it will work against those who don't have the resources, really. Because if, for instance, you're talking about the president now, it's no longer the delegates. In the past, when we talk about presidential elections, you elect the delegates. For instance, how those they call the statutory delegates, that those who are holding positions in the party, those who are holding positions either in the National Assembly, those who are former governors, those who are former ministers. No, some of these things are spelled out. These are the statutory delegates. Then you can now go to the ward to go and elect 3 delegates. And these are the people that converge in Abuja. You can even determine them, maybe 5,000 of them or 6,000 of them. So somebody who has the resources can now begin to make permutations, how to get these 5,000 delegates. But when you are not throwing it open, for instance, some parties now are claiming they have registered up to 40-something million people. So it means for you to emerge, there must be something extraordinary about the candidate. You have appealed to the people. So not necessarily money this time around. Maybe it has to do with the manifesto you have, your program, or going by your pedigree, who you have been all along, maybe in the service of the party, or maybe positions I've held in the past. People can begin to look at, okay, maybe we can give this person, a try. But otherwise, if you are thinking of buying the delegates, it may be very, very difficult for anybody to buy delegates that run into millions. So that is the advantage. But the disadvantage, again, is the parties, in terms, because this has humongous implications in terms of finances, arranging elections in all the wards in the whole federation. So all these parties, maybe perhaps with the exception of maybe APC and PDP, I don't even know any of the other parties that may have that kind of capacity to organize the election in all the polling units. We used to have about 100,000 polling units in the country. I don't know how many we have now.
They have over 2,000 now.
Okay. So how do you now make your presence felt in all these places? So the possibility is now that some candidate that may not be able to cover all the polling booths, some results may be returned from some of those polling booths that are not manned by any of your representatives if you are a candidate in the election. So again, that may even open up to litigation. But the truth of the matter now that it gives opportunity to every member of the party, you understand?
To
At least to participate
in the
You
selection.
understand? You cannot have a
of
sense
their-
of
yes.
what? That at least I am taking part in deciding who emerges as the candidate of the party. So otherwise, this position now is taking power to the people. You understand? Unlike the indirect primaries, where you have to deal with just a specific number. So somebody who is a money bag can count the number of the delegates, come with his money, and buy them, or load them up as a witness in 1993, like I told you, where some of these delegates were just, quarantined in some places, and then never allowed other competitors, to have access to them. So these are issues, that
All
these
right.
have thrown up.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Onsu. Let's take a short break. When we return, we'll be going straight to Professor Baba. Thank you for staying with us. Let's join Professor Yahya Tanko Baba, who is with us from Sokoto. Prof, we're looking now at the issue of direct and indirect party primaries. What do you think that this development, this amendment to the Electoral Act Amendment Bill will do for democracy?
Yeah.
Do you think that it would deepen
I think-
internal party democracy?
Part of the national to come with this regulation of dictating to parties how they conduct their internal affairs. Of course, there are concerns. These concerns are that excessive centralization of decision-making process in the hands of few people within the party, within parties, big men, influential patrons, holders of executive power, are actually are taking advantage of that excessive centralization of decision-making process in political parties and conducting the affairs of the party, of parties generally, in ways that actually favors one segment of the party to the disadvantage, not only to other members of the party, but even to democracy. But we should remind ourselves.
Prof, are you still with us? We appear to be having some challenges with the network there. Professor Yahya Tanko Baba, who is with us from Sokoto. Hopefully we should be able to reconnect with him because he was making some very cogent points there about the over-centralization of power in the hands of some individuals within the parties that may have led to this. Now, but while we wait to see if we can get across to Prof. Prof, are you there now?
Yeah, I'm there now. I'm there now.
Okay.
So what we are saying in essence is that the extent of democraticness of a particular society is determined largely not only by the fairness of the elections that are being conducted, but by the democraticness of the parties themselves. And I think the National Assembly is concerned about the autocratic nature of our parties in the Fourth Republic. We have seen instances where party leaders, holders of executive power, patrons in the party, taking decisions unilaterally about candidate selections, about party congresses, about even key decisions that has to do with the fate of the party. This has led to massive defections. I mean, party switching by important, notable politicians from one party platform to another party platform because of the extent of dissatisfaction in the way in which party affairs are being run. And what the National Assembly does now is to dictate to parties how they are internally organized or how they conduct their internal affairs. But I think this excessive regulation of political parties will undermine the values of democracy. But democracy is about liberalism. It's about fairness and liberty and, of course, freedom to take decisions. And parties are the most important platforms that people get to learn about practices of democracy. So now, if we insist that, or we make laws that parties must conduct primary elections through direct means. Now, our whole electoral process that is being conducted directly through polls where people cast votes, we are still struggling to sanitize it. Now we have to also come back to political parties, because the mess that are in the broad electoral process in terms of conducting elections will also afflict political parties. So now, if we quash consensus, if we quash delegate means of conducting primary elections, and we insist that the only acceptable, lawful means of conducting primary elections is only through direct primaries. Now we have constrained political parties who have made now primary elections, to be costly. Funds now will be expended just as funds are expended in general elections, and now money banks will take advantage. Now vote buying, just like delegates are being bought off, just like voters are being bought off during elections. Now we'll see scenarios where individual political actors within parties will begin mobilization on how to manipulate the process of direct primary elections. So I think what is most important is for parties to evolve frameworks themselves through their party constitutions, through their rules, through their regulations, to develop a framework that is acceptable to party members on how candidates should be selected, on how congresses should be conducted, on how aspirants are to be chosen. And now, if this is acceptable, now it holds on INEC to now, as a regulatory institution of political parties, to insist that parties actually obey tenaciously the provisions of their constitutions and the provisions that are made to establish rules and regulations of their internal conduct. But when you insist that, elections must be conducted this way and this only way, then of course, we are into troubles, and that we are exposing our political parties to the risk of breakdown, to the risk of rigidity, to the risk of the influence of money in election, and that we are going to also see the level of political violence rising right from the period of primary elections. And now we also are going to see campaigns, media campaigns that are unprofessional, that are uncompetitive, emerging within political parties. And the ranks of the party will actually be very weakened in the build-up to general elections. So by the time party primaries are conducted through direct means, members have been injured in terms of mobilization and campaign, and of course the use of telephone language, just like we see in the broad electoral process. Before you go into election proper, you will experience mass defection of people from one party to another party. You will have a tense political atmosphere. You have parties weak in the build-up to the elections, and you have already the culture of the use of finance and money to buy votes and to influence people to vote in one way and not another way, becoming a culture and a norm in Nigeria's political and electoral process. And that way, it will harm, to a very large extent, the broad electoral process in the country. But then, we must also take into cognizance that the current regime of conducting party primary elections is also completely largely undemocratic, and that those that are actually occupying advantage positions within parties, either as patrons, as party leaders, as holders of executive power, are also involved in the manipulation of the processes and the rules and regulations, and even the laws in the Constitution, to ensure that their favorites emerge as candidates and their favorites also emerge as party leaders. What we need to do is to strengthen the folds of political parties, to ensure that membership of the political parties have direct not only direct contact and link with the parties, but they have direct influence in the way in which party affairs are actually organized. If consensus is acceptable, then there should be modalities worked out clearly, transparent, in which consensus can now be reached. If delegate elections are, of course, the American political electoral system also use delegate system in their party politics. And we have seen how delegates assemble themselves, how elections are determined, how candidates, aspirants are chosen, and they come out clean. They come out clean and they come out strong in the build-up to general elections. We need to invite this habit of fair play, that habit of sportsmanship, and that habit of actually convincing people to accept a particular argument, that is superior than another argument within the interaction of people that exists within one party or another party.
All right, Prof, just stay with us. Hold on for us. Dr. Onsu, the Prof has thrown up a number of issues. And in addition to all of that, those who seem to support the direct primaries insist that everything, all the challenges with the current system that the Prof has mentioned actually exist. They have been with us for quite a while. For instance, as it were, as of today, there's hardly any of the 18 or so registered political parties in Nigeria that has an authentic membership register. So if they do not have, and we are moving towards the 2023 elections, in fact, as we speak, some of the parties are already preparing for their national conventions, which means that this proposed amendment will not even apply before the 2023 elections and the primaries of the various political parties for the general elections itself. But if this is the case, will the direct primary system now make them more organized and more disciplined as political parties?
Well, when we started, I told you that I have my own reservations, concerning the intervention of the Senate or the National Assembly, as it were, in this process that is supposed to be entirely that of the political parties. Because if we are growing our democracy and we want our democracy to stabilize to the point we can now be referred as, a developed, democracy, a democracy that has commensurately, has developed, we should have allowed the political parties to decide at whatever point in time the particular, model they want to use. Do you understand? There could be some elections, given the circumstances or even the environmental circumstances, that might, inform the use of maybe indirect. And on certain occasions, probably they may consider, direct primaries. I remember sometime, I think in Osun State, in the last election that brought in the current governor, they adopted, the APC then, I think, accepted indirect primaries as a model then for that election. But a few days to the actual, exercise, they changed it to direct. And there were a lot of protests. So some people said that by resorting to direct, the whole idea was to make sure that certain candidates, were manipulated out of the process. So the truth of the matter is that both direct and indirect are subject to manipulations. Do you understand? But if we want the political parties to evolve, the best thing would have been allow them to decide, at any particular election which model they want to use. So by National Assembly getting involved, it's like you are not trying to regulate the political parties. We know it is the responsibility of the National Assembly under the laws, to come up with the Electoral Act to govern the conduct of elections. And again, INEC has their own responsibility in terms of monitoring political parties. I believe that if the parties are allowed to conduct, decide the kind of primaries, the model they want to use, and then with all these other processes that have been put in the system, like monitoring of the primaries by INEC, to ensure that the parties follow their rules, that will help, in the parties not going to the extreme of over-manipulating the process. But with these direct primaries now, sanctioned by the National Assembly and now being part of the Electoral Act, there's no room for the parties to, maneuver. It means head or tail, this is what we are going to use. And like I observed earlier, not all the parties may have the resources to organize these primaries in all wards of the whole federation. And what that means is that in certain areas, they may resort to writing results. And I don't even know whether INEC will have the personnel to man all the polling booths in all these places, because it's like just conducting another, national election at whatever level you are doing it. Whether it's the level of House of Assembly, you still have to deploy people to all the 36 states plus Abuja. I mean, House of Assembly, Abuja is not there, unless when they're doing the area council election here. So at the level of even states, National Assembly elections, INEC will still deploy people to go and monitor all these things. So for me, the best thing would have been to allow the political parties to decide in whichever way they want to do it, as long as all the members are buying into it. Do you understand? We have seen even the indirect primaries produce results that did not even reflect maybe the expectation of those who were trying to manipulate it.
So what of a situation where the parties decide to stagger the elections or the primaries from state to state, like we did see during the Third Republic? So if say maybe states in the North Central Zone are to have their own primaries this week, the other zone might have the other week, and so on and so forth. Would that not make it less cumbersome for the political parties and for the Electoral Commission to monitor?
Okay, I think that this is a very great idea, because we are talking about intra-party election this time around. Because if we are to be inter-party,
yes,
in that case there might be a problem, because what it means, Party A may be waiting to know who is going to emerge in Party B before you know who are going to field, who may be a stronger candidate to confront the person in Party A. So, but since it's intra-party, so there's nothing, nobody's losing anything. So it's a way of even conserving resources. Do you understand? So if you have your electoral officers, you finish from state A, the same people can move next week to to another state. So in that case, you'll be able to limit, the kind of logistics that will be involved in covering all these elections in one day. So I think it's something that can be considered, in my own opinion.
Prof, let's come to you and to...
Yes.
Yes, Prof. Do you think that it would make the parties more disciplined, more organized in their affairs? Because we have seen in the recent past situations where, like you said, the party oligarchs have been dictating what to do, what system to adopt, and what system not to adopt, and in fact, outright imposition of candidates on the parties, as it were. Do you think that the direct mode, for instance, some have suggested and some have argued that it would make for easier mobilization from the primaries, the mobilization from the primaries, moving on to the general elections itself, would make for a better and more robust mobilization of the electorate?
Yeah, I think only if this mobilization is competitive. But where mobilization is confrontational, then it is even injurious to the broad electoral process. I think the issue of discipline and organization matters a lot when it comes to the conduct of affairs of political parties. And I think one major thing that is missing in all this discourse and about what the National Assembly is doing to evolve laws and regulations that will make parties more transparent, more accountable, more democratic, is that offenses related to elections are not actually punishable, are not being punished. In the election period are usually regarded as period of emergency. Therefore, whatever offenses and misconduct and malpractices that are being perpetrated by individuals within parties and individuals even outside parties, by different agents, different categories of people, they go scot-free without being tracked, without being, for instance, prosecuted, and without being punished for one offense or the other offense. So all of what is happening, all of what are happening within political parties are happening largely on account that politicians and different actors in Nigeria's electoral process get away with whatever malpractices, whatever manipulations, whatever offenses they commit. Therefore, if it's delegate, if it's direct primaries, if it's consensus, that whatever manipulation that is being perpetuated within parties and even between a relationship between parties, these offenses are not being punished. And therefore, it has now become part of the culture of Nigeria's electoral process to manipulate the process and get the result first. That is what matters. And therefore, when you get the result, then you sort it out at the court. And the court and the tribunals are only interested in who actually win election and who doesn't. About mandate, reversing mandate and confirming mandate. Not who commit what offense and what punishment is there to be meted on individuals, on groups that have perpetuated this offense and cost the Nigerian political and electoral system time, energy, and resources. So we abandon this aspect of punishment, and then we insist, we will focus mainly on getting exactly what the laws say, or what the laws, what is the implications of the laws of election about a particular case before a tribunal. So I think what we need to do is to actually get to set up a regime of punishment for different electoral offenses, so that actors within political parties and outside political parties will have it at the back of their minds that you can only perpetuate one form of malpractice or illegality and another at the expense of facing one punishment or another. And that way, political parties will be better organized, will be more disciplined, will be more transparent, will be more accountable, and the process of mobilization of the people, the process of leadership recruitment, the process of even articulation of manifestos of parties will come to the fore, and people within parties will get to be interested in registering as members of parties and get to participate actively in the way in which their parties are run. And that way, election will be competitive and not confrontational in Nigeria.
Thank you so much, Prof. Dr. Omosu. One last one before we go, which is the preponderance of litigations, electoral litigations in Nigeria. Do you think that the adoption of direct primaries will reduce this? Because we have seen situations where people stay in office for up to 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, and then their elections are declared invalid, not necessarily because of even their qualifications or whatever, but because of the processes that threw them up within the parties themselves.
Well, before I respond directly to the question, I know the Prof was talking about these electoral offenses.
Yes.
I know in the past, I think it was the West Panel, or after the West Panel, there have been series of electoral reforms where suggestions have been made about the unbundling of
the
INEC.
West Panel suggested that.
The unbundling of
Yes.
INEC, because the INEC, as presently constituted, has a lot of responsibilities. Ordinarily, the main responsibility of INEC should be the conduct of election, updating the electoral register. There were suggestions about party registration commission, to have a commission that deals with the issue of registering political parties. There was only a suggestion about electoral offenses commission. Up till now, that commission has not come into place. Because if that commission had come into place, I think it will help us to reach some of these infractions.
The argument is that politicians who are the ones who commit these electoral offenses
have refused.
Do not want to
have the commission come in place.
We don't want to put a commission in place that will try them.
Okay, so that's the problem we have, because if we have the commission, honestly speaking, I think most of these politicians will begin to err on the side of caution. A situation where you go to manipulate the primaries and say, okay, let's go to court. Because here the argument is whoever wins, let's go to court. I know this case can linger on for years. We saw it happen many times. And that's why there are even suggestions now that even before anybody is sworn in, let all the cases be disposed of. Do you understand? So I believe that until that commission is put in place, I don't even see this.
Whether direct or indirect primaries.
So I don't see that
still have situations
curbing issues of litigations. Do you understand?
Litigations
we still have litigations.
Yes.
Because people will always disagree with the outcome of the primaries. Do you understand? Once it does not favor them. So let's do a little to ensure that we can, if we can get that commission in place. I know that politicians are, everybody, the law of nature, self-preservation. You don't want to put something in place tomorrow that will catch up with you. But I think if we're determined the will is there, we can push for it. We have seen it happen now in the case of Senate reversing itself on this issue of electronic transmission of results. And we saw the forces that came into play, both the civil society. I believe that in future, going forward, if we can mount this kind of pressure, we can still get that commission put in place.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Emeka Nwosu is a public policy analyst, a former media advisor to the Senate president between 1999 and 2000, a former president of the National Association of Political Correspondents, NAPOC, a veteran journalist. Thank you so much
for
joining us.
My pleasure.
We also joined all the way from Sokoto virtually by Professor Yaya Tanko Baba, who is of the Department of Political Science at the Usmanu Danfodio University in Sokoto. In fact, he teaches comparative politics in that institution. Thank you so much, Prof, for giving us your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. All right, and you are viewers out there, we want to thank you immensely for investing your time with us. Please join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. Bye for now.